And I'm super excited. This morning we have with us Adrianne O'Donnell from the Houston Printing Museum, and she's been working there since about 2019, where she is the Education Programs Manager, and with that, she oversees education curriculum, public programs, exhibitions. And so while she was at UT Austin, she discovered the book conservation lab of the Harry Ransom Center and was able to explore bookbinding as an intersection of art, technology, history, and craft. She is a bookbinder, and she enjoys creating miniature books and researching historic bookbinding styles. And she's been a member of the Houston Book Guild since 2013. So Adrianne, I believe you are here today to give us a tour of the Print Museum, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I am so happy to be here with you guys. Feel free to, interject, shout anything, type something in the chat if you want. I can't quite see the chat, but I'm sure Rachel will, my wing woman, help me out and just let me know if you guys have any questions or comments. I'm just going to be nerding out and sharing a few of the things I love at the Printing Museum with all of you guys. We have a lot of treasures at the Printing Museum, and I have been there since December 2019, so I got to start a new job, and then the pandemic happened. So we have been adapting and rolling with everything, as I'm sure we all have. We are at 1324 West Clay Street, so we are in the Montrose area. And if you've ever visited us before, wonderful, congratulations. Thank you for finding us and visiting. We often hear, oh, I didn't know that you were there, or, didn't know Houston had a printing museum. We went through a name change. So we used to be the Museum of Printing History, which was a little stodgy. So we changed to the Printing Museum recently. This is our building, our facade. We have a lovely printing press outside so you can identify us, but we are off a main street, so can be a little tricky to find us. So that's why I included a photo of our front there. And so I thought it would be fun to kind of just start with some printing idioms, perhaps. So linguistic artifacts from printing history, or just printing usage. So uppercase and lowercase, we've heard of this, right? So when you're learning to write your letters in grade school, we are learning that the majuscules are uppercase letters, and the minuscules are lowercase letters. So this literally comes from the type case of where you had your metal letters or wooden letters, your movable metal type, all sorted into the cases, because that's what we call the trays. So if you've got all your cases, most of them will be down below in the lower cases, and you'd have your majuscules that you would put up above. So in the little illustration in the bottom left, you can see the little printer typesetter there with this composing stick at the cases and pulling the upper and lower cases to set a sentence or word. So uppercase and lowercase, it's so ubiquitous, it's easy to just never even think about. So that's a fun one that I love to share with school kids, especially as they're learning their letters. Mind your P's and Q's. I've heard pints and quarts, like in a bar setting, but this is a typography related thing too, because when you are setting your letters, you have your composing stick, and that's what the image in the top right is. And I was just doing this yesterday because I'm a bookbinder primarily, an educator, but just yesterday I got to spend some time in our letterpress studio composing something, and composing is the process of hand setting type. And this got me again. So you need to mind your P's and Q's, because the lowercase P's and Q's look very much alike. And when you're doing them upside down and backwards, like you do when you set type, because printing is a relief process. So it is mirrored when you see it so that it is right way up when you put it on the page. And so you may be thinking, what other letters look alike? B's and D's, also problematic. So mind your P's and Q's. This comes from printing, and it is a helpful reminder so that you don't have typos unintentionally. If you're out of sorts, this is also a printing thing. It means that you have run out of the sorts, like the letter E's. E's are very important. That's the most common letter in the alphabet, right? So if you've run out of sorts and you've run out of your E's, you can't finish whatever you're working on, your newspaper, your broadside, whatever it is. It's important because you're setting it in type. So you are indeed having a bad day to be out of sorts. And then hot off the press, this one is a little more easy because it's literal, but yes, the presses would get warm as the giant rolls of paper were coming through. And so later newspapers would also they were working with that heat too. They would also keep the ink the right viscosity. So newspapers would roll off hot off the press. So if you think of anything else that is a linguistical term, put it in the chat or let me know. Love to hear any others you have. Okay, so precursors to printing is kind of our first gallery that we have. I have a bookbinding background. I got to learn a little bit of book conservation, and I have an art history degree. So this is kind of my favorite room. So I'm going to talk probably a little bit more about like the book side of things. So just bear with me and roll with it. We are going to enjoy learning about this today. So I have an assortment of things here. Front and center in the middle there is papyrus that when I bought my house is growing wild in the backyard. It is kind of a swamp plant. It does grow, so it proliferates. But papyrus coming from the Nile, that's one of our early substrates for printed materials. And so the Egyptians figured out how to take this plant and they're slicing it into thin slices, making a mat of it and pounding it. And that's getting those cellulose plant fibers to adhere to each other, form a writing surface that could be rolled into a scroll. Now, scrolls are kind of original to books before we get to even like your traditional hardbound book. That's a codex style. That's where you have signatures, paper, parchment, perhaps folded in half, sewn together. That gets you a codex. Before we even get there, we have the Assyrians and the Babylonians writing on clay tablets and cylinders. So I have one of those in the bottom left. That's probably our oldest artifact in the museum, being thousands of years old. And then you have scrolls, and scrolls were great. You could unravel it, read more information. So papyrus, better suited for scrolls, just because of the nature of the materials. It's not going to work well for a codex. If you fold that in half, that's really brittle. And then you've just kind of snapped your paper that you worked, your paper-like material you worked so hard to make. So this is why, given the availability of materials, it informed the technology of how you are getting your written word. And so before we even get to printing, you have to have a way of putting thoughts on paper. So alphabets are developing at this time, the scribal traditions. We also have pages from all sorts of books and interesting handwritten things. We have a giant Gregorian chant book. It's huge. And that's one of the benefits of seeing artifacts in person, is getting a sense of the scale of them. And I don't have a photo of that one. It's just a very traditional leather bound volume, but it is huge. And that's made out of parchment, which is the treated animal skins. Parchment and vellum are very similar. Vellum just means it's from a calf or cow. So think vellum is like veal. Parchment is the catch-all term for that material made of animal skins. So the Gregorian chant book in our museum is huge. The Coptic book in the bottom right on my slide here is very small. That is a personal prayer book. So not just the technology and the materials, but also the function. How are these things meant to be used? So a chant book, you only have one book because the whole choir is sharing it. It needs to be huge. So that one is gigantic, so everyone in the back can see it. But your Coptic New Testament in the bottom right here on the slide is very small because that's a handheld kind of devotional book. We also have examples. We augment the museum with facsimiles. So we have a facsimile of the Book of Kells and the Duc de Berry's Book of Hours, which is beautifully illustrated with tons of blue, ultramarine blue, and ultramarine meaning across the sea, because that came along trade routes from Afghanistan. That's where lapis lazuli is from, and it is one of those pigments that turns out per ounce to be more expensive than gold. So for this book to be illustrated with all that blue says, look how rich I am. I can afford all of this blue. And even in the New World, there are codices. So in the top right is a facsimile of a Mixtec accordion style book. So I'm trying to grab artifacts from all over the world here to show you guys and give you a feel for them. The Mayan, Aztec, Mixtec, before the Spanish conquest, they had quite a few books, and the written works, their alphabet is logographic, meaning the symbols are represent ideas, not like sounds like so much like we have. But a lot of them were destroyed. So there's only about a few dozen that survived in the world. Because of that, we don't have an original one of those, but we are able to have facsimiles, meaning we can get a sense of the idea and the scale and what they look like so much better, seeing a physical object without having to travel to Ireland to see the Book of Kells and things like that. So paper, we haven't even gotten to paper and printing yet. So paper and early printing. Everyone does think of Gutenberg first. I know I always did. But, you know, paper gets developed kind of concurrently along with the parchment being developed in Pergamon, which is Turkey, because papyrus was the main predominant material for hundreds of years earlier, but it had to be traded because papyrus only grows in a very localized area. So if you could trade and get it, great. If you couldn't, you had a problem and you still want to put your thoughts down. So in Turkey, you know, they start developing parchment, treating those animal skins. So, you know, their libraries, their books take off in that direction. And so concurrently over in China, paper is developed in 105, approximately CE. And so paper travels through to the West eventually. Gutenberg is what we think of when we think of printing first, but I want to let everybody know that printing was developed with movable type centuries before Gutenberg in Asia, so in China, in Korea, in Japan. And so we have a real treat at the museum, and it's one of those lesser known gems. But so on the right is a photo of the Hakumantu Durrani scroll. And so this is from 765, 770 AD from CE. Gutenberg doesn't print his Gutenberg Bible until 1455 AD. So that's 700 years before Gutenberg. That's huge. That is a long time in the grand scale of printing. So why don't we hear about it? Why don't we know more about that? So if you look in the bottom left, you see an example. It's a later example, but this is a physical object we have at the museum that if you come visit us, you can see up close. And this one is from the 1900s, 1900 China, but this is very similar. So we have archaeological records of metal movable type being developed in Korea as the first in the 7th, 8th century. This is what it kind of would be similar to. This is the concept of metal movable type. Each character, word, phrase, you know, depending on your language, is a symbol, is a piece of type. So we have 26 letters in our alphabet, but then you've got the majuscules, minuscules, you got some punctuation. So all told, best worst case scenario. Gutenberg needed about 300 different characters for doing his Bible. And then you print multiples, you make multiples of those. Because just setting my name, Adrianne, Adrianne, see, I already need 2 A's, 2 N's. So that's why you have to make multiples. But Gutenberg worked with 300 characters for our 26-letter alphabet. In the Asian alphabets, you have so many more characters, thousands of characters. I don't know offhand the number, but it is a lot more. And so to keep stock of that many is quite a task. And so while developed earlier, it doesn't really take off. It just turns out to be easier to carve the whole thing as a wood block all in one go, not worry about saving it and reusing it. Like the time savings and efficiency are so much so that, you know what, we're just going to do one whole book page as a wood block as a whole. So while developed earlier, it kind of tapers off and isn't really known for movable type after that. So Gutenberg and his printing press. Let's talk about Gutenberg and what he is known for. So we don't know much about his personal life. We have some court records about his life, and that's kind of the most on the official record. We don't even have an image of him. What we have best are later approximations artists have been done, because there weren't any cameras back then. He wasn't sitting down for portraits. So any depiction of Gutenberg is always kind of like a best guess. He was alive in Mainz, Germany in the 15th century. And he came from a family of goldsmiths. He was an entrepreneur. He was starting businesses. He did pilgrims mirrors. So if you're going on a pilgrimage, get a mirror. So we do those in metal from when you visited as a souvenir. He did do pamphlets and smaller things printed before his Bible, but his Bible is his seminal work. When I was talking about other cultures, and the scribal traditions, where you've got the Gregorian chant books, the Book of Hours, devotional books, in the West, Gutenberg decides to print the Bible, the Holy Book, as his first book. Interestingly, when printing does later come to Turkey and the Ottoman and Islamic empires, they go a different direction with it. They, because their scribes and calligraphy are so important in society, you can't replace that with a machine. It's something without, the handwritten, the meditative effort behind it. So while Gutenberg is okayed to do the Bible, the Islamic countries say, no, that is forbidden. The Quran needs to be handwritten. And what you can print, what the Sultan okays for the very first printer in Turkey, was to do the science textbooks, medical journals, and other things like that, so that students could have textbooks more cheaply and easily. And I just think that is a really interesting side note. So back to Gutenberg, and at our museum, we have a replica press, and that is what is on the right. That is our physical press that if you take a guided tour, the docents will show you, demonstrate how it works, if there's time or if it's not too humid, because, I'm sorry, we are in Houston, it's really humid here. Sometimes that wood kind of binds up and it's tricky to pull a print on it. But what we're looking at is a press that's wooden. So, that's an early technology that's adapted from existing technology, from a wine or a cheese press. And these are agricultural tools in Germany at the time. So Gutenberg's adapting that. Gutenberg has movable type. He's come up with a way to recast or make multiple castings of letters in a really efficient way. So if you're going to cast metal before, you would have probably taken your hard metal tool that you've carved it. So think back to his goldsmithing kind of family and experience. So on the far left, top left, that set of images I'm going to talk through is how to make metal movable type. So you're going to carve your letter H into that in a hard metal. And then once you have one perfect letter, perfect, you are set, you're done. All you have to do is that one. That is your punch. You're going to put a softer metal underneath it, like brass. Hammer your punch into that to make an impression, and that makes a matrix for you. So that matrix now, that softer brass, that second one, is what you're putting into a hand mold, then pouring in metal and casting that. So you can do multiple H's, and they're all going to be the same size, and you trim them to the same height, and then you have an assembly line. So Gutenberg is also coming up with the right alloy of metal, because you can't just use pure lead. If you've ever played with lead, touched it, felt it, it's soft and it's not going to hold up to pressure of a printing press. So while maybe other people tried coming up with something, Gutenberg really perfected the alloy. So it's mostly lin, but it's also tin and antimony in smaller amounts. So this is kind of type metal. This is a type alloy that you'll use for this now. So without this punch and matrix system, you would be casting against sand. And then to take it out of the mold, you have to ruin it. So you have to start over every time. So This system leads to reproducibility, scalability, and then you are creating hundreds of those characters so that you have enough to set a page of type. So in the bottom middle, we have a stereotype, so it's a copy of the handset type. So it's all one plate. You'll have to forgive us that, but it is in that black letter kind of Germanic font. And this is called Textura. And what Gutenberg did was design his typeface to look like the scribes would have done in the day. So nothing too revolutionary or different. You know, we're just going to copy what somebody would have done by hand, but we'll make it perfect and there won't be mistakes in it. It'll all be uniform. So Gutenberg has adapted a wine press. He has created metal punches for that, casting that metal type, come up with the alloy. Now the ink, he also has to come up with and adapt. So if you are a scribe, you've got a water-based ink. It's like a iron gall or an oak gall. So you've taken the galls on an oak branch that a wasp laid an egg into the branch and the tree made a gall to protect itself around it. Somebody in the Middle Ages or earlier discovered that this can be used for creating a very dark, rich black ink. So that's what the scribes would use. Well, that's just going to run off the metal. That's not going to stay on top of the metal where I want it. So Gutenberg's also kind of developing, working in a linseed oil-based ink that he would have applied with the 2 ink balls. So we have even our replica ink balls there that you would kind of pound, dab onto the top of your type. And then you fold the sheet of paper, put the piece of paper on the press bed, fold it down and roll that under the press. You can pull it, move it further along, do the second page, because when you are making a book, it helps to have something to fold them in half and make a signature out of them. So you're taking a longer sheet of paper, folding it in half. So one sheet of paper would have at least 4 pages on it. So Gutenberg, it's a 2-pull press. You would put one in, pull it, move it down, do the other one. Then you let it dry, and then you can come back and do the back sides. So you have to think about typesetting this too. And this process is called imposition, is doing the page layouts. You can't just start setting in the beginning and then continue with the next sentence or word in the very next set of page. You're doing page 1, and depending on how many sheets you're stacking together when you make your signature, if you've got 4 sheets folded in half, that's 16 pages. So you're setting page 1 and 16, and then 2 and 15, and it gets really complicated. It's my least favorite part of bookbinding, is doing the imposition. But Gutenberg would have printed, he printed about 180 copies on a mix of parchment and paper. Most were on paper, but he did a few deluxe versions on parchment as well. He would sell them in quires, folded like the scribes would have completed them. And then you would take those stacks, if you purchased one of his Bibles, to your favorite bookbinder, which was a separate trade, separate from the scribes, the calligraphers. So you have your scribe or your printer now creating those. And then you take those to an illuminator if you want it even more deluxe and illustrations added, or a rubricator to add the red, because Gutenberg is just doing a 1 pass in black. And then you take them to your bookbinder to get bound. And so if you've ever seen those old libraries, beautiful, where all the books are uniform, and you ever wondered, why does my library look like that? Like, how are they so uniform? It's because when you buy a book, when you would buy the contents of a book, you weren't having it bound yet. You did that, and you specified when you took it to get bound what you wanted to look like, or your bookbinder keeps records of what your library looked like, and they just do it in your style. So tangent on bookmaking history, but it's fascinating to me, and I love sharing it. So that's what I'm here to do today, is kind of share the things that I find fascinating. And if you have any questions, let me know. Feel free to interrupt. So incunabula period of printing is just like the cradle period of printing, literally means cradle. About 50 years after the invention of the printing press, that all of Gutenberg's kind of things working together. 50 years after that, so by 1500, there were over 1 million books printed and available in Europe. I mentioned earlier that we don't know much about Gutenberg himself, just a few court records. So he was brought for breach of contract for not marrying a woman who she felt he had said would marry her. And then Gutenberg wasn't the best businessman, so a great inventor, entrepreneur, but wasn't able to manage his finances well. So his financier repossessed his printing press as, you know, part of the non-payments because he was sued for that. And so his creditor, his son-in-law, gets the printing press because he had also installed his son-in-law as Gutenberg's apprentice. So Peter Schoeffer becomes the second printer in Mainz, Germany. And there's a great book by, I think, Alex Christie called Gutenberg's Apprentice. And it's a kind of novel fictionalization, but well-researched and really interesting. If you want to read more, I highly recommend that book. So some of the other presses in the museum, when you come take a tour, we have our Gutenberg replica press available to print on. The Columbian cast iron press is another one. So this is in the next gallery, and it's this cast iron one with this gold eagle on top, and that other gold embellishment below it is a dolphin, very stylized. Printing press technology stays the same for about 400 years. This is, yeah, the 1800s when George Clymer decides to come up with the first cast iron press made in America. So for colonial printers, Benjamin Franklin, famous printer during the American Revolution, he always identified as a printer. Even after he made all of his money, was a postmaster, in his will, he said, "I, Benjamin Franklin, printer," because he got his start in printing. He was apprenticed to his older brother, ran away, that didn't go well, started his own print shop. Because like Rachel was saying, printing is so fundamental to disseminating information. Revolutions go differently. So it really is important and a game changer. Well, during the colonial era, if you don't have a printing press, it's a lot harder to share information. And there weren't that many people making printing presses in the Americas yet. You had to import everything from England. So when things start getting contentious, that's going to be a problem. These things are huge too, even the wood ones, you know. We'll get back to the Columbian press because this is more Civil War era, kind of in between the American Revolution and Civil War. But just think back that the technology of printing is the same from Gutenberg's day. So wood, common press, but you have to import that metal type from England. You have to get, which is heavy, really heavy. You have to import even your paper because there aren't many paper mills in America. So when the British passed the Stamp Act and that taxation on paper, is also to kind of tamp down the colonists getting paper for their newspapers and, you know, keeping each other informed like that. So everything has to be imported. That's why when we have our first press later made in the Americas, that is a cast iron press, is kind of a big deal. The very first cast iron press, so this is the next big leap in printing press technology, is going from wood to cast iron. You're going to get more pressure. You can have a bigger platen area, which is that big rectangular squishy part. That's called the platen. That's what's applying the pressure. You can get more pressure if you have a metal cast iron rather than just wood. And on a wooden press, the screw is wood too. Here now we have compound levers and weights, counterweights. So the eagle, while decorative and beautiful, they called, George Clymer named it the Columbian press because he was, you know, very proud. He's American. Columbia is a name for America. The eagle is another symbol for America. So the eagle is beautiful, but it also is serving as a counterweight to help when you pull that lever, like our docent is demonstrating here in the photo. This made it a lot easier. I think some of the advertisements said that so easy a boy could do it because before in Gutenberg's time, you did have to have big burly men pulling that press, but less so when we come along to the cast iron press technology 400 years later. When we get to the Civil War and journalism, you have to think of all the other things happening in the world at that time. We are getting the telegraph, steam power, photography, you know, is more available and prevalent. So with the telegraph, news can travel faster with more access to paper mills and type foundries now being in America. We have access to this. We have a more literate population. So while we had weekly newspapers before in the Civil War, we really do start seeing a lot more daily newspapers because you're able to spread knowledge faster. People were more hungry for it too. So we have a photo. This one is handset type. This copy of the Declaration of Independence will have either this or in the top right, the Emancipation Proclamation available for printing. So if you come by, take a tour, you can get up close, you can see all those tiny letters. The original Declaration of Independence was done by hand. It was a hand copy, but then it was like a rush job taken overnight to the printer so that the broadsides could be printed and distributed. So, you know, metal type gets really small when you're doing a newspaper too. You have to have pretty good vision. You have your apprentice, like I mentioned, Benjamin Franklin was apprentice. He was printer's devil is the nickname that you would give them. And one of the worst jobs is having to clean up that type and then redistribute it back into those type cases. That is not a fun job, to take all of those little A's, B's, C's and put them back in their proper place. But you have to, because otherwise you're not going to be able to pull them the next day to do the newspaper when you need to. Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper is one of my favorites. Now this one is hand embellished with watercolor, but this one is hanging in our wall in this gallery as well, because it goes with that whole, the telegraph and journalism, is that people and photography wanted more news. The newspapers started putting maps of Civil War troop deployments, and illustrated newspapers become a thing too. So to get that out in a timely manner, engraving something that detailed would take forever. If you have any artists in the group, you know, that's kind of time consuming to engrave that. So what Frank Leslie did is he's like, okay, so he chopped it up into 16, 32, whatever he needed to, and gave it to that many engravers, and they all brought it back together and reassembled it after receiving their initial plans. So ingenious way to get that news out faster. I just think that is so cool. We have a lot of Texas history field trips come by. So the next gallery after that is our Albion printing press in our Texana gallery. This one isn't working yet. This is a historical artifact from the 1820s-ish, 1829. There we go. And so this one is, it's seen some things, but I want to talk about this in relation to the Columbian. This one is much smaller, and this is considered a travel size printing press. So it could be broken down into 6 parts, was its selling point, and it could be carried by ox or, you know, horse-drawn carriage. I still feel sorry for the poor beast of burden that had to carry that, but no, this was considered portable for the day. It's working on the same technology. It's kind of just scaled down, so we don't really have any major developments there in printing presses. But being able to be a frontier printer like Texas and Mexico was a big deal. And so having a press was huge. So in this gallery, we kind of tell the story of Texas history through the life of Samuel Banks. And he came to the Texas area. It wasn't even Texas then, you have to remember. So I don't know, I didn't take Texas history when I was here in 7th grade, because I wasn't here, I lived elsewhere. So I'm catching up on my Texas history. But think back, the amusement parks, Six Flags Over Texas, right? First there was France, and then Spain, Mexico, Texas is an independent republic, the United States, and the Confederacy of the United States. So those are the 6 flags over Texas. Samuel Banks was in New England, believed so much in the Mexicans' cause for independence from Spain that he came down, landed in Galveston, carried on south, but was captured. So he was then put to work by the Spanish government, printing their agendas, their government notices, and other broadsides, and laws. So he was imprisoned for 6 years, given up for dead by his family. When he was finally released, he went back home, found out he had been declared dead, had nothing, got married, found himself a wife, but then decided to source more printing presses and go back to Mexico where he had lived so long. So on the left is the laws of colonization. So if you were now in Mexico at the time and you wanted to colonize it, and a lot of the Anglos did come to Texas, these were the rules you had to abide by. So this copy is printed by Samuel Bangs, and he printed this. He decided to he decided to change his name to Jose Manuel Bangs, become Catholic, convert, pay taxes to Mexico, own no slaves. These are some of the laws of colonization. So he signs up for this. He does not actually, he gets land granted to him, but then is swindled out of it when he leaves it in the care of a lawyer. So he just has a rough life. He's a very tragic kind of Forrest Gump character, but he sees throughout his lifetime the area of Texas go from Spain to Mexico to the Republic of Texas, and I think even the US. Another document that he prints on the right is talking about land lots. He ironically lost his land, so a bit of irony, he's having to print this document. But he is still trying to make his way as a printer. He starts up newspapers, they kind of fail, and he moves around a lot and does die penniless. Currently on display in one of our special galleries, because we have a permanent collection, and that's mostly what I've talked about so far. My virtual background is our lobby gallery right now, where we still have a letterpress print exchange up for show. This is another one of our temporary exhibits, and this one will probably be coming down soon, but this is the selections from our permanent collection. And it is the etchings of Bernard Wall. So he, I think, was from Connecticut, and he's a historian, and he does all of the research, and he does these etchings himself in 1936, all about the life of Sam Houston. So we have these prints up in our gallery for viewing right now, kind of following on the Texas history theme. But okay, the linotype machine, we got to get to this, is one of my favorite machines. If you're mechanically inclined, I hope you'll agree with me how amazing it is. This is developed, invented by Ottmar Mergenthaler, who was a German immigrant, but American, so German American, and he is developing this. Oops, sorry. He is coming up with this in the 1880s. So that's kind of our next major landmark in printing history, where I talked about once you've printed everything, you have to clean the type, put away all of those metal movable type pieces. Such a nuisance. The linotype machine is that game changer, because what this is doing is that it is casting a whole line of type at a time. So in the bottom middle is one of those matrices where we aren't putting it into like a hand mold anymore. This is it. So it has the letter on the side, and on the top it has these teeth marks so that the machine knows, it's like a barcode, it knows what letter it is based on the notches in it, the order that they're in. So when you're sitting down at this keyboard, and the keyboard is not QWERTY because this is pre-typewriters and QWERTY, a keyboard hadn't been standardized yet. So there's a documentary called Adrianne O'Donnell, and that's because of the layout of the keyboard is ETAI, and it's based on the frequency of the letters, which ones are the most commonly used, starting in the top left of your keyboard. Anyway, so you sit down at this machine, you type what you need to be on your line of type, and then all of those matrices, multiples of those, so you know we have an A here in the picture, but if you're typing out in the beginning, you pull out IN space B, and then it is self-centering. Those spacers in it will move up or down because they're a wedge, and they're adjusting to the width that you need. And then its column width is what it's going to cast all at once when it's got all your matrices lined up together in a line. So huge time savings there. You aren't having to hunt for these. It's self-centering, it's doing the spacing for you properly too. It's casting these. And then you take all of your lines of type, you stack them up in your newspaper column in your galley tray, and there you go. You have a newspaper column. When you're done with it, you wipe it off, you throw those back into the metal pot to be recycled and used again the next day. So this really was ingenious, saved so much time. And so ours is from the 1950s. So our linotype machine is working. It's a Model 31, and it was used like along with about up to 35 others at the Houston Post and then the Houston Chronicle, and was used through the 70s, and then came to us eventually. So they're remarkable machines. They weigh a ton. So if you find one, sometimes people are giving them away for free, but you gotta be able to move it yourself, which is the hard part. When you are setting all of your lines of type into your newspaper column, in the middle is a stereotype, and the thing behind it where it says Houston Chronicle and the headline of the day, and this is why they saved it: Armstrong, Aldrin take a giant leap for mankind on the moon. That is a flong, which is kind of like a cardboardy paper matrix. So you're making an impression in there, and from there you can cast those half circles, those stereotypes, to have a cylinder press create multiple copies, and so that you could have all of your presses printing it. So on the left we have a Cranston cylinder press, because going from a flat platen is great. The platen you can only do like one pull and then do one page at a time. This is when we start getting into the cylindrical presses, and huge increases in efficiency again. Once you're able to continuously be feeding in more sheets of paper, it keeps itself inked. It's driven on a belt system, so you can steam power or hook it up to a motor. So more developments. This is, again, our daily newspapers just taking off in whole new ways. And then typewriters, we have a healthy collection of typewriters, and this is a lot of fun because it's when you're on the tour, it's a lot of visitors will be like, oh, I learned on this one, or I had one of these, and I love hearing those stories. So this is just kind of a photo of some of our typewriters that are on display. The QWERTY keyboard gets set, we kind of come up with that. The Remington company, the ones that make guns, decide to diversify and get into making typewriters. They were also doing sewing machines. So there's a lot of similarities when they start selling the typewriter tables with the typewriter on, like the sewing machines. A lot of parallels because they were manufacturing them kind of together, same time. Remington company bought the patent from Scholes and Glidden, and so the Scholes and Glidden typewriter is the Remington #2. And typewriters take off. We have a good assortment. One of my favorites recently is the Oliver typewriter on the top right, with kind of like the bat wings. A really interesting way that they have the type bars going. If you type too fast on any typewriter, those type bars can get locked up. So that was kind of why QWERTY was developed in the layout for the keyboard it was, to minimize that. We recently found the music writer. So in the bottom right is a detail shot of the keys and then the actual type bars that strike paper. If you are transcribing music that you've composed, it's a unique and niche tool. One of my favorites, I'm not gonna lie, I have favorites, is the IBM Correcting Selectric typewriter. So on the top left is the one we have on display. It's a Selectric 2. And the first Selectric came out in 1961. Very curvy, beautiful. The Selectric's claim to fame is these type ball elements rather than the whole platen, the whole paper moving. Your paper is staying in place, and the thing that is typing is moving, and it's on a ball and it's rotating. So it's getting rid of the problem of the type bars getting jammed up. You can easily swap it out. So, okay, full disclosure, I love this so much that I went and acquired recently my own IBM Selectric typewriter, and I was learning typewriter maintenance, never used a typewriter before, decided to start with an electric typewriter. They are fascinating, amazing machines, but they have at least 2,000 parts. So there's a lot going on there, but they are truly remarkable. And if you find one today, the most common problem is that they haven't run in decades and the oil has just gummed up. And so you just got to clean them. We have the type ball elements set on a globe stand for sale in our gift shop. My dad designed those and I think they're just really adorable. So if you have any typewriter friends, you know, think of them. They were on Christmas. We have those at the gift shop. And then I think one of the last kind of most amazing things is the Xerox 914. Xerography comes from the Greek for dry writing. Totally different way of making copies because you have mimeographs that were doing these, but Chester Carlston in 1960 comes up with this dry way of making copies, because before with typewriters, you've got your carbon copies, but you're really not able to easily make copies. It's not like having a printing press. And so nothing was available like that in the office. So having the toner, the dry toner powder, and then the light and the heat with that static, fusing it onto the page was just totally revolutionary. There's a book called Copies in Seconds, if you want to read more about him. Pretty cool inventor. We also have a collection of miniature books, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them. They are often their own little display case, but we have hundreds, maybe thousands, miniature books because they take up so little space. But on the left is one of my favorites. It's the 1896, printed by the Salmon brothers in Padua, Italy. And this is a copy of Galileo's letters from 1615. And look how tiny that book is. This is set in type that was at the time the world's smallest type, and it was called the fly's eye type because it is so tiny. Even just setting regular type is hard, but this was done in movable type. And so just let that sink in for a minute and think about that. It's incredible. It's 206 pages, by the way, and it is only 19 millimeters by 13 millimeters. So kind of lastly, wrapping up what the museum is, we have group tours and field trips. We love having visitors. We're looking forward to welcoming more. We're kind of this is pre-COVID, this photo. We're looking forward to welcoming groups back, but for now we're doing smaller sizes. We are hosting workshops. We just did Lego printing, Lego letterpress printing. So taking those little flat tiles and printing them. And then we even have visitors getting fancy doing 2-color registration. So you could see, you just get a really quick, easy idea for aligning things and thinking in that negative way of setting type or Lego pixels. We also have artist in residence program because we have our artist studios, and I have photos of those studios coming up next. But we want artists and people to make use of what we have rather than it just being a static, boring, dead museum. So we do, you know, we have a lot of hands-on things and we want them to be used and enjoyed. And so we also started an artist in residence program. We have 4 new artists joining us now, and they'll be giving a talk at the end of their tenure in December. So we are looking forward to seeing what they make while they are in residency at the Printing Museum. And we also do have, because we have group tours and field trips, we do have docents. So if anyone is interested in becoming a docent, you know, get with me, I'll get you more information, or you can visit our website. But September 14th, I have a docent info session coming up. Our letterpress studio, we've expanded. We have Vandercook cylinder proof presses. On the left, we have platen presses. It's just a great workspace. We have a bookbinding studio with tools for doing gold foiling and stamping and guillotine to cut pages and all of that. We have a papermaking studio where we have monthly papermaking classes where not just white sheets of paper, but also doing colored pulp, painting with colors of paper. It's a lot of fun. So that is also coming up because paper is also made from lots of materials, like you can use denim, you can use cotton, flax, linen makes great papers. And so that is us. We are open Thursday and Friday from 12 to 5. And then if you want to come on Saturday, we are open even longer from 11 to 5, closed on Sundays. And if you want to catch a guided tour, which I hope you will, because that is the best way, in my opinion, to experience the museum, you can come by at 1 or 3 p.m. and our docents would be happy to give you a tour on Saturdays. And we also have a virtual walkthrough, which I almost forgot to mention. So if you want to like walk through the museum virtually, you are welcome to do that. And that's on our website at that link. So thank you so much, Rachel, for having me.
Thank you for coming. And we do have a few comments and questions here.
Awesome.
For you. Hold on, I'm going to make it so I can scroll through them. Starting with Ken saying, you bet popular use of the printing press really fueled the expansion of knowledge and the birth of our culture. Do you pound your own homemade papyrus since you have the plant? I imagine growing the plant is only the start.
Very true. Yes. No, it's on the to-do list because there's a bit of soaking involved and then pounding. Yeah. So I just need to get space. One of our instructors is actually in Canada, and she came by printing working with blacksmiths. So they were super handy friends of hers to be able to have blacksmiths, because all that cast iron for the hand presses, they were able to help her say like, oh, here's how you can repair this press if you find it at an antique mall and it's a mess, this is what's doable and not. So like that's a workshop that she does for us from Canada over Zoom, because yeah, there's a lot of people finding these presses too. And yes, printers back in the day would be built like blacksmiths, like burly people, probably with one arm bigger than the other too.
As the printers had to hand place the type by hand, they read everything they printed for sure. Franklin learned a lot, and I suspect his colleagues did as well. Linotype must have been a humdinger to type on, worse than typing dittos with a manual typewriter, I'd guess. Have to be moving values and other things to let the liquid metal flow into the type with no electric assist.
Yes, ours was retrofitted to have hydraulics. Not by us. It came to us having bed fit because it was a commercial machine. Yeah. You got to watch out for the squirting metal type, I've been told. And we recently had someone come by and do maintenance on it, which was fantastic. He's like, oh, okay. It's not as bad, as I was worried. That leak is old, I think. So no, our linotype still works, and we hope to get it up for demos again soon. Not like every day, but like at least once a year on linotype day, because yeah, that thing is amazing.
William is saying, I learned to type on a Selectric, and Ken is wondering if you can still get fresh ribbons for the Selectric.
Yes, I may have been up late on eBay last night and just got some more last night, so it is doable. eBay, but yes, because the Selectric came in lots of varieties. There was a 8.5, 11, 13, 15-inch platen. Then not only that, you can have carbon film versus a fabric inked ribbon for them. So you're already up to like 16 combinations of whatever machine you have, but there are still ribbons for them depending on which Selectric you have. Yeah, that is encouraging too, because that is the other thing. So no, if you've got a Selectric, go ahead and get it out and get typing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Adrianne, for showing us some of your favorite things about the Houston Printing Museum. I'm so excited to have gotten sort of a peek into some of the artifacts and type that you guys have available for viewing. And it's definitely going to be a field trip on my list as a must-see here in Houston. So thank you so much for giving us a piece of life in writing, or life in print, so to speak, and for taking us through the history of type as well, just to give us a greater idea of exactly how much we should appreciate our modern technologies and how far back this stuff actually goes. So with that in mind, We are going to be speaking next week at noon with Realtor LeVar Harden, and he's going to be talking to us about smart home buying. And, that's something that I've been keeping an eye on in terms of newspapers and printing as well. So do join us then for next week's Life at Noon. And thank you again so much, Adrianne, for joining us for today's. We will see you guys around.
My pleasure. Thank you.